Myst, the Book of Atrus continues, as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the Plurality Report, who is trying to upgrade his 56.6 kilobaud dial-up internet connection to a high-speed, broadband, 1.5 megabit fiber optic T1 line. Chapter 16. Gehn woke with a pounding head and so many aches that he wondered briefly if he had not perhaps blacked out and fallen. It would not be the first time, yet it was the first time he had allowed himself such license while Atrus was on Kavir, and he cursed himself for not locking the door before succumbing to that second pipe. He got up, groaning softly. Aches, yes, but nothing broken. "No damage done," he said, walking slowly to the door. Then, steadying himself against the landing wall, he looked down the steps, squinting now, his pupils tight, painful. "Atrus? Atrus? Where are you?" But the library was empty. He went down, then out through the empty chamber, feeling a vague misgiving. Something had happened. Something. He stopped, remembering. The boy. He had argued with the boy. Crossing the open space between the library and the upper cabin, he threw open the door and hurried across the unlit chamber until he stood in the shadowy opening on the far side. "Atrus!" He waited a moment, then called again. "Atrus!" Nothing. The great mansion was empty. Unless the boy's asleep. He hurried down, bursting into Atrus's room without knocking. "Atrus!" The bed was empty. He turned, looking to the great carved wardrobe in the corner, then strode across and pulled it open. No, Atrus was not there, and none of his things were there either. The thought made Gehn blink. He hurried back to his study and searched the cluttered desk, but the notebook was not there. Reaching down to his right, he pulled out the second drawer and took out the metal box he kept there, placing it on the desk. Then, taking the key from the tiny bunch about his neck, he unlocked it. He took the single page from the box and, folding it in half, slipped it into his pocket. Leaving the box where it was, he went over to the door and shouted down the unlit steps. "Rijus? Rijus! Where are you, man?" Not waiting for the mute, Gehn hurried down through the house. On the final twist of steps, he slowed, then stopped, his suspicions confirmed. The jetty was empty, the boat gone from its mooring. Gehn slumped down onto the bare stone wall, letting his head fall forward. "Curse the boy! Curse his ingratitude!" Gehn lifted his head, the pounding at his temples momentarily making his vision swim. As it cleared, he saw that Rijus was standing on the turn of the steps just above him. "The boy has gone," Gehn said. "He took the boat. We need to follow him." The big mute hesitated a moment, taking in what his master had said, then came down the steps and, moving past Gehn, went over to the far side of the cavern. There, in the shadows, a number of boxes were stacked against the wall. Removing them, Rijus exposed an old, unpainted doorway. He looked about him, then stepped over and took down an old boat hook from the wall. Placing the tip of the hook under the bottom edge of the door, he heaved. The door splintered and fell away. Gehn stood, then went across. Inside, in the musty darkness, Rijus was removing an old canvas cover from over something. Gehn blinked, then discerned what it was. It was a boat, an old Donny craft. "How did you know?" he wondered, looking to the mute. Ignoring the stabbing pains in his head, Gehn stepped inside and helped Rijus haul the ancient boat out onto the jetty. It was a strangely long and elegant craft. More a canoe than a raft, and handling it, he realized that it was made of a durable but curiously lightweight stone. Gehn shook his head, marveling that he had never suspected its existence. It made him wonder what else there was about the mansion that he did not know about. He looked to Rijus, watching as he attached the ropes, then winched the ancient boat out over the water. Atrus held the lantern up, studying the page a moment longer, then closed the notebook and slipped it back into his tunic pocket. Left. He had to turn left at the next fork. From there, a narrow tunnel led through to a small diamond-shaped cavern with a low shelf of rock to the right, at the far side of which was a series of limestone ledges, leading to a flight of steps. He walked on, the lantern raised, following the slightly curving tunnel, conscious of the sound of his own footsteps in that confined space. How many times now had he stopped and listened, thinking he was being followed, and how many times had he heard nothing but the silence of the rocks surrounding him? Ahead now, the tunnel widened, then spilled out into a kind of groin in the rock. There the tunnel split in two. That much, at least, accorded with the diagram in the notebook. Atrus took the left-hand fork, walking on quickly now, his heart pounding again. If it was the diamond-shaped cavern, he would rest there a while and get his breath. And if it wasn't? Twice already he had had to retrace his steps, but this time it would mean a long trek back through the tunnels, and he did not relish that at all. The trouble was that you had too much time down here to think. If he could have walked on thoughtlessly like a machine, it might have been okay. But as it was, he could not help himself imagining all kinds of things. And the worst of his imaginings was a vivid picture of the cleft, abandoned, choked with sand. It had been almost 4 years since he had last seen it. 4 years he had last heard Anna's voice. He heard her now. "What do you see, Atrus?" "I see rock, grandmother, and tunnels, and darkness, everywhere I look. Darkness." But her voice did not return. There was only the sound of his own footsteps, going on ahead of him and behind, filling the darkness beyond the lantern's reach. Atrus looked at the notebook again, turning the page, and turned it back again and frowned. Then, with a tiny start, he felt between the pages, locating the torn edge of the missing page, and groaned. He looked about him, trying to remember, to retrieve from memory the path he'd taken all those years ago. Had he descended into the cavern, or had he come up into it? If he chose wrongly, he would be lost. And if he chose correctly, then, judging by the other pages, he would face the same kind of choice another 5, maybe 6 times before he could be sure he was back on course, before he reached the safety of the next page. He swallowed bitterly, wondering just when his father had torn the page from the book, then looked up. "So, you thought you would make a journey, did you?" Atrus froze, then slowly turned, facing his father, noting at once the cloth wrapped about his boots. "I thought it time I kept my promise to my grandmother." "Your promise?" Gehn laughed humorlessly. "What have you promised to me? Besides, I think you have something that belongs to me, and I mean to have it back." "Then you'll have to take it from me." "I see." Gehn half turned, gesturing to Rijus, who stepped from the shadows just behind him. At the sight of the mute, Atrus realized that he stood no chance. If it had just been his father, he might, just might have gotten the better of him. but he knew the mute's strength of old. Why, he'd seen the man lift heavy rocks he himself could barely budge, and throw them out of the way. Atrus moved quickly. Taking the notebook from his pocket, he threw it high into the air, then, casting his lantern away, turned and ran, climbing the rock face like an ape before vanishing into the tunnel. He heard his father's cry of anger and frustration, and knew that Gehn had not expected that. Gehn had thought he would come quietly, just as he'd always done in the past. But the past was the past. He knew now that he could not stay with the man, even if it meant losing himself here in the depths of the earth. He went quickly, his right hand keeping contact with the tunnel wall. Then, unexpectedly, the tunnel dipped, and, with a cry, he found himself tumbling head over heels, coming to a jolting halt against the wall. He lay there for a moment, stunned, listening to his father's echoed shouts.
Atrus! Atrus, come back here, boy!
Atrus groaned and sat up. For a moment he blinked at the darkness, wondering which way he was facing now, then saw, distant yet unmistakable, the glow of a lantern above him and to his right, at the head of the tunnel. He had to go on into the darkness. Pulling himself up, he stumbled on, making his way down as quickly as he dared, away from the approaching light. And now, strangely, it came to him. He remembered where he was. If he closed his eyes, he could see it vividly. Just ahead, the path branched to the right, then climbed. Where it opened out, there was a broad ledge of rock, and beyond that, a gap, a narrow chasm, straddled by a tiny rope bridge. If he could get to that, then maybe he had a chance. Maybe he could hold them off somehow, or find a way of destroying the bridge so that they could not pursue him. Feeling a faint breeze coming from his right, Atrus stopped and turned, searching with both hands until he found the entrance. As he'd thought, the tunnel went sharply upward, forcing him to scramble up on his hands and knees, his head bent forward. There was a faint light up ahead, and, as he came out of the narrow tunnel, he saw that he was precisely where he thought he'd be. Only the ledge was brightly lit, a lantern standing off to one side, while ahead, Atrus groaned. Once more his father had anticipated him. Once more Gehn had had the final laugh. The rope bridge was gone, the 4 metal pins jutting up nakedly from the rock. He went across and stood there, looking down into the chasm. It was too deep, the jump too great. Or was it? Atrus turned, hearing noises in the tunnel behind him. There was a flicker of light, growing stronger by the second. In a moment they would be upon him. He turned back, staring at the chasm. It was now or never. Stepping back, he took a deep breath, then ran at it, hurling himself across the gap. "Atrus!" His chest slammed against the edge of the rock, winding him. Yet even as he began to slide, his right hand reached out and grasped one of the metal pins. He spun about, his shoulder thudding against the rock, his right arm almost pulled from its socket as he held on for dear life. Yet he could feel the strength draining from his fingers. He could feel them slowly slipping, the sweat from his palms sliding on the metal. And then a shadow passed over the top of him. There was a deep grunt, and then something gripped his upper arm and began to lift him slowly up. Surprised by the strength of that grip, Atrus turned his head, expecting to see Rijus, but it was Gehn who stared back at him, a sullen anger in those pale eyes.
"Ah, boy!"
he said, his fingers pinching mercilessly into Atrus's flesh as they hauled him inch by inch to safety.
"Did you really think you could outjump me?"